So good morning, everyone. How are you guys feeling? Are you like a morning person or more like an evening person? I'm more like an evening person, so it's gonna take me a little bit to like wake up. But yeah, welcome everyone, and first of all, thank you so much, Global, for having me. As Asenath was saying, I'm a faculty member that went through the immigration process, and I could resonate with so many things that were mentioned here. The struggle sometimes, and actually my immigration process was also like through COVID, which made it like even more challenging. I spent over like 1 year without being able to fly back home and being able to see my family, and that put me like in an extreme state of anxiety and almost like depression. But Global was always there supporting, and I'm happy to say last November I got my permanent residence. So thank you so much. I'm so happy. Yeah, so I'm gonna start, I guess, like talking a little bit about myself and why I'm here. So this is like little me when I was 5 years old, and so my passion for language and intercultural communication and getting to know other cultures, it started, I guess, when I was that year. That was 1982, so you can calculate my age right now. And we had the World Cup in Spain. And it was like, it's one of my memories when I was a child at that age, watching like the football matches with my dad, you know. And I didn't understand anything, but you know, he was excited, so I was excited with him. And I remember like in one of the matches, like some of the players were discussing, and I didn't understand. I was like, what is going on, Dad? And he was like, well, they have, you know, communication issues because they speak different languages. He actually said they have different languages. In Spanish, tienen diferentes lenguas. They have different languages. The thing that is that in Spanish, the word language and tongue is the same. So in my 5-year-old brain, I understood that people from different countries actually had different tongues. And I thought that was so cool. So I was like, I really want to be able to switch my tongue, you know, and speak different languages and have like a green tongue or like a colorful tongue. So that's how it kind of like all started. And I always like developed like this passion for traveling and getting to know other cultures. So another thing that I wanted to add about in the introduction is that Asma said like she accepted immediately. Actually, it took me like a couple of hours to accept. So when I got the email, I was like, oh, I was like, you know, excited, scared at the same time, like, you know, like the imposter syndrome came like chasing at me like with a vengeance. But then I was like, you know, actually like, you know, translators, we are cultural mediators too. You know, like we work between cultures, and we are always like in that space, you know, among and between cultures. And actually, like Asenath was mentioning that many of you speak another language. Can I ask how many of you speak another language? Yeah. Okay. Almost everyone. And you've probably acted as translators or mediators in a way, right? And that kind of makes you a little bit experts in intercultural mediation, even if it's at an intuitive level. So yeah, and actually there is a lot of research, you know, on how translation and culture is very related. Especially, we can see that a lot of in interpreting, but also like translation, you know, like texts are actually like culturally situated always. So, you know, like in text there is like culture surfacing always. So when we are translating, we're always thinking of culture. So I'm going to talk a little bit, like, I'm going to try to give like a common framework so that we are all on the same page. So the first thing that I always explain, and just, you know, we use the word in translation studies, we differentiate between translators and interpreters. Translators are the ones that work with written text. So I'm more like a translator than an interpreter. I actually did my first official interpretation yesterday, and it was actually very interesting. So interpreters like work with oral language. You will see interpreters like in the UN, you know, like the people in the booths, like for instance, those booths, they are usually for the interpreters. Or you will see interpreters like in the courtroom or in hospitals, okay, so help you like mediating. And translators are usually at home, you know, and working in texts. It's common though to use the word translator, like we are aware that many people use translator for both, And there's like some confusion sometimes about like, when I used to study, like when I studied translation and interpreting, people thought that I was doing like some kind of acting or something like that because I was interpreting. But it doesn't have, it's not related to that, okay? And interpreters actually translate everything. Like we are supposed to translate. We're not supposed to interpret the message and kind of like say what we think that the person said. We are supposed to be as accurate as possible. So, and then culture in translation, of course, there is like a close relationship. So you probably, last year in the workshop, you've probably like heard or read many definitions on culture. It's actually like, that's one definition, the whole physical, social, historical, and ideological environment within which any use of language occurs. And that's one possible definition, but actually like, researchers and scholars, they don't agree in one single definition of culture because it's such a complex construct. And then in communication, so culture surfaces because we always share knowledge and experience and a context. I'll talk about context later. And of course, when we are talking about texts and practices, like communication practices, they are always somehow culturally situated, though there are like some texts that are more, or some situations that are more culturally situated than others. For instance, if I have to translate a song, like a folk song, that's, there is a lot of culture there. Whereas if I have to translate a technical text, there might be some things like, measures, difference in measures and things like that. But usually they are pretty standardized, so like culture is not going to surface that much. So again, like, what is culture? So again, like this idea that it's a complex notion, and it's visible, that's what we see in the text, but it's actually internal, it's collective, and it's acquired rather than learning. Many of the behaviors that we have, they are culturally informed, but we cannot explain why we are acting that way. It's like, we're just like that, right? But because we acquired that as, as babies almost, and then it's part of who we are. It's actually like, culture is part of our identity. And then it also represents a shared mental model or map of the world that is dynamic and is evolving in nature. That also happens a lot with international scholars because we are also, we are international, sorry, but at the same time we are in this, we get assimilated, we assimilate the culture of the country that we are in. So, and I didn't say that, but I lived 6 years in Germany. So sometimes in my identity, I have German things. Like weird German things, for instance, Germans are very individualistic. So this is a little anecdote, but so when I lived 6 years in Germany, and then when I went back to Spain, we were partying, and then I was kind of tired, and I was like, I'm gonna leave. And all the Spaniards were like, no, if you leave, we all leave. And I was like, why? I didn't, my mindset had shifted. I was like, no, I just can take a taxi and leave. And they were like, no, but we're here as a group, the collective culture in Spain is if we do this all together. Okay, so there are aspects of my identity that have shifted. And of course now that I live in the US, it's funny because every time that I go to Spain, people are like, you're so American, and I'm like, really? Because I have traits that they identify as weird or foreign for what a Spaniard, a typical Spaniard would be. Yeah, and it's not a thing, but rather a sense of what defines and distinguishes us from others. So that sense of identity. And it's not culture with a capital C, we use this word of we have culture. We are cultivated people, but we're talking about something different. So there are different frameworks to try to classify culture and how we react and how we behave. You're probably familiar with some of this. This is actually one that Edward Hall designed in 1976, and that has been adapted to translation studies, and it's the cultural iceberg. So culture is divided in all these different levels, and usually translators work more on the technical because we work on language, right? But I think the idea here, it's important, what's important to highlight is that things that are in the informal or formal levels surface to the language. Okay, so you're gonna see things, for instance, talking yesterday in class about theater translation. So you can have something like in the stage directions like, and they kiss each other. You know, they greet and they kiss each other as a stage direction. So that's like a cultural trait because, you know, in some cultures, we give 2 kisses. In some cultures, they even give 8 kisses. In some cultures, it's like, you know, Germans would be like, what are you doing? Like, don't come close. Okay, so that would be something that I have to, like, as a translator, I have to detect, okay, this is a cultural trait, and then I have to decide what to do with that. Do I adapt that? Do I just, like, translate and then let the actors decide what they're going to do? So that's when, you know, all the strategies come of what translators do. And then, you know, cultural models, for instance, you're probably familiar with this one too, the cultural dimensions van Hofstede. So, like, cultures go in this continuum, you know, in different values, from egalitarian, like, you know, the power distance, collectivist, individualist, so what I was talking about before, you know, like, for instance, like, Hispanic cultures are usually more collectivist, Asian cultures too, and then Anglo-Saxon cultures are usually more individualist. So that can cause, like, sometimes, like, some friction, and, like, you know, the anecdote I was talking about before, because you don't understand, like, why is this happening, right? And as I said before, that's so part of our identity that we don't understand that there can be, like, a different way of seeing the world. Just to, I mean, I'm not going to read all these, but just some frameworks that can help us, you know, to divide or classify cultures, though, or people into cultures. Like, this is another model, the Lewis cultural model, and he divides cultures into linear active, multi-active, reactive. So you can, you know, try to find yourself in this like triangle. So in my case, I would be around here, so I'm multi-active, talks most of the time. Do I talk most of the time? Now I'm doing that. You know, like, but yeah, does several things at once, plans grand outline, emotional, and, you know, we're more emotional. We are we are okay with, like, displaying feelings. We often interrupt. That's, oh my God. Like, we are always, like, if you see, like, a show in Spain, it's like a constant interruption in the dialogue, okay? And you have to get used to that, you know, because it can be very, very challenging if you're used to, like, another cultural model. So that can, I'll share the slides if anyone is interested, and you can use this. So now I'm gonna go to my field, like translation and interpreting. And when I was preparing this talk, I was like, you know, let me think about some concepts, like some ideas that we use in translation studies, and what kind of, like, lesson or takeaway can have for intercultural communication. So the first notion that I wanted to talk about is equivalence. So if I told you equivalence, what do you understand as equivalence? Equal? Okay, so equal value. So, okay, so that's, you know, when people start translating, like, especially, like, beginners, right? In my classes, like, students they come to translation class, and then I ask them, like, what is translation? And it's like, just changing one word for the other. Like, yeah, well, it's a little bit more complex like that, you know. First, because usually, like, very often, words don't have the same value, and sometimes, you know, they don't even have the same counterpart in the other language, right? So actually, like, equivalence, that was one of the frameworks that was used in translation studies at the beginning, like the theories, you know, were trying to define translation in terms of equivalence. Like, translation is, you know, translating a text is finding the equivalent text, or, you know, like, looking for the equivalent text in the target culture. But actually, like, you know, as translation studies evolved, they realized that it's actually a bugbear, and it's like one of the most argued ideas in translation studies, because it's actually very complex, like, to talk about. Yeah, you just have to find the equal value. So, for instance, right, that's like a simple example. If I told you, like, what's the equivalence of like a dog barking, right? So there's gonna be, like, you know, cultures understand barking like how they sound different. Like, the dogs sound different in different cultures, right? And it's an illusion. It's actually an illusion. So, for instance, if I show you these two pictures, if I show you the first picture, you will think of a phrase, like an expression in English, that has to do with an animal. What?
Goosebumps.
Goosebumps, any other?
Chicken skin.
Chicken skin, okay, so goosebumps is usually like the expression, like in Hispanic cultures, is chicken skin, like piel de gallina, but in other cultures, it might be like a completely different animal, okay? So there, we have like different levels of equivalence. Are we looking for an equivalence in terms of like word by word? Like, you know, like am I looking for, what does this expression actually mean in the target language, right? So, oh, it's actually like little bumps of a goose, right? If I translated that into Spanish. Or what's the meaning behind that expression, right? It's like, that's the meaning behind the expression, like goosebumps, right? So then I have to find the equivalent expression, okay? So like for instance, like it's raining cats and dogs. If I translate that literally in Spanish, it doesn't make any sense at all. What? Okay, so I have to find the equivalent expression, okay? What about the other one? That's a little bit like trickier. If you're Christian or Catholic, maybe that. So there is in Christian tradition, there is the Lamb of God, right?
Yeah.
So lamb is an animal that is not present in all cultures. Okay, so like a theorist, he was like, oh, maybe if we have to like translate, like convey this message to like Eskimo culture, then we have to talk about the seal of God, right? You know, like thinking like I have to adapt. So in terms of like equivalence, you know, like if I just translate the word lamb, they might not even have a word for lamb to start with. Or it might be such an obscure, because they don't have lambs, right? So I have to think like, you know, what's actually the meaning behind that, behind this, and what's the equivalent, not only in terms of words, but in terms of meaning. So the takeaway is that languages are far from asymmetrical, and cultures even so, even less so. Okay, so when we're communicating, it's not like a word by word thing. It's actually like, you know, what's the meaning behind it? What's actually the right equivalent, like in terms of like the meaning. So we always translate for meaning. Okay. So another is the context. Okay, so that's like. So there's like a famous joke. So we always say, like translators always answer like, can you translate this? Or how do you translate this? And we're like, it depends on the context, right? So what is like the audience? What is this for? When was the text written? Is this translated into Spanish? Spanish from Spain, Spanish from Mexico, Spanish, like, do you want like a Hispanic version? Like, it's, you know, we need the context to understand. So when you're working with translators, always give them the context. Like tell them like, we need this text for this and this, and this text was crafted for these reasons. And it's gonna be translated for the same reasons. Or no, we want to translate it for other reasons. So that we have, like we understand. Because we are not, when we get a translation, we're not in the context that you are. So we need to understand the context. So the context is actually like a perception rather than a reality. And that's more like in the field of like psychology, like cognitive psychology and perception. But like, so we can, when we perceive reality, we have like two ways of perceiving reality. One as it is, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to survive. You know, if I don't see like, I don't know, like a step, I will fall. So I have to perceive reality as it is. But then we also perceive reality as a psychological construct. Okay, like all the subtleties that are in the context. I don't know if that has happened to you, but when I'm traveling, sometimes I can, 80%, 90% of the times, I can identify a Spaniard without them even like opening their mouth. The way they dress, the way they gesticulate, even if I don't hear the language, I can say that guy is from Spain, Italy, maybe. I can like place. So I'm perceiving this thing that is not, you know, tangible, but it's part of the context, okay? And these things that, you know, like the context is constructed by three things: the field, the tenor, and the mode. So what is happening, who is participating in the communication, and what part the language is playing. So how important is the language in this interaction? And that takes us to like different levels of cultures, like high context and low content cultures. Okay, so we have like high context cultures where people feel responsible for their family, they value the concept of face, like a strong public image, and then that's more like Asian cultures, etc. And then low context cultures. And I think like an image speaks for 1,000 words. So for instance, like a low context culture is like, don't rely so much, just give me the instructions, just give me, the steps. I don't need to interpret from the context. Just high context cultures are gonna be like, just let me explore. Let me read the context, and get the information from there. So there's gonna be like a difference there, like in the way that we communicate. So another related to the context is implicatures, which means like the action is implying a meaning beyond the literal meaning. So for instance, saying like a frame is nice and implying I don't like the picture, okay? So if we hear door, bathroom, we understand, that someone is knocking on the door, but I'm in the bathroom and I cannot open. But I don't say all the words, it's understood from the context and it's implicated, right? So according to Grice, we actually, when we are communicating, we are always trying to like feel these maxims, like, like comply with these maxims. The quantity, so giving enough information, but not too much. Quality, be truthful. Base your contribution or evidence. Base your contribution on evidence. Relevance, stay relevant to the topic and matter. But we're all the time when we communicate, we are breaking those maxims, okay? And that creates the implicatures, okay? The takeaway here is that these maxims and this breaking of the maxims can be different in different cultures. And if I notice that there is like a miscommunication there, I might have to explicit, so bathroom, door, have to like, the door is someone is knocking on the door, I'm in the bathroom, I cannot get it. I cannot open the door. So I have to explicit what is going on because otherwise I'm not gonna get, what is happening in that situation. So we do not communicate by language alone, but by the relation between language and context. So that's important to notice. Purpose. So in translation studies, as I said before, we started like with equivalents, like very linguistic approaches, like word by word, like we have to be very close to the text. And then the discipline like evolved. And then in the 80s, like some theorists started talking about functionalism and purpose. So they were like, you don't translate texts just like thinking of words, you're translating the purpose, like what are you using this text for? So what I'm gonna create is an equivalent in terms of like, I'm gonna create a new text in the target culture that has the same purpose, okay? And so I'm gonna put this, not everything, but I don't know, have you seen the Squid Game, the show? Do you remember, I don't know, because we are nerds, like translators, but there was like a big controversy about the subtitles. Okay, do you remember what was that about? It's fine if you don't. Okay, so she started like the controversy because, let's see what she said.
Everyone, I just watched Squid Game and I'm fluent in Korean and I have the English subtitles on and I noticed that you're missing so much from the English subtitles. Here, I tweeted about it earlier, pause to read. So I thought I would make a little video just to show you. Sorry, I'm a little busy today, so there's better examples, but these are just the ones that I found in like 10 minutes. So watch this, let me know if it's interesting. If you like it, I might make more. But here's the first example. I want to start with Minya, by the way, which her name translates to beautiful girl, which I think is really interesting. Her dialogue constantly gets botched. Like every little thing that she says is fucked up. I think it's because she's like plays like a low class character and she's a gangster. So she cusses a lot and it gets very sterilized. And randomly, like even things that like aren't even that bad, like she says like, what are you looking at? It's turned to go away, which might seem arbitrary, but like everything she says is not really aligning, and so you're missing a lot of this character and what she stands for. But here's the one part that I think is a huge miss. Here she is trying to convince people to play the game with her, right? Right here. translation says, oh, I'm not a genius, but I can work it out. What she actually said was, I am very smart, I just never got a chance to study. That is a huge trope in Korean media. The poor person that's smart and clever and just isn't wealthy. That's a huge part of her character. And almost everything.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. So what is going on here? Did you watch this show? Yeah. How do you feel now? It's like, do you feel you missed a lot of it? So let's see the context. So we're talking about a show that is on Netflix, and that in this case is being subtitled. So one of the characteristics of subtitles is that I have very limited space, you know, and I have very limited time. So when I'm actually like, any show that you see subtitled, you're getting probably like 60–70% of what is actually said in the original. That's by default, like you're missing something, definitely. The second thing, or the second observation is that what's the purpose of a show like The Squid Game? Or any show in Netflix? What's the purpose? What's the main intention of Netflix? Entertain. Okay, so it's not educate us about Korean culture. It's not, you know, it's not inform us about Korean culture. It's entertain us. So do you think by even losing some meaning in the subtitles, the English translation is fulfilling that purpose? Like, is it entertaining us, the show? I mean, I thought it was entertaining. I don't speak Korean. So that's, you know, that's where the purpose comes from. So I'm translating so that the text has the same purpose. Yeah, I'm going to sacrifice things. Maybe I win some things. Maybe I can, you know, embed in my subtitling some wordplays or something like that that make it funny for the American audience. But I'm thinking of what's the purpose, okay? So what's the goal of this communicative situation? So one of the takeaways is like tailor to audience. Like when you're communicating, think of the audience and think of the intent, what you want to communicate. And that might mean like here, cutting information that is not relevant for the culture, or adding information that is specific to that culture. Okay, so it's not only like, sometimes I have to add things, okay, because that culture, for whatever reason, doesn't understand, you know, certain concept. So I have to like add more text. Okay, so it goes beyond translation. Sometimes I have to adapt the text. Another concept, communicative autonomy, and I'll just, you know, autonomy, and I'll just describe. So this is mostly used in interpreting, is the idea that everyone in a conversation should be able to communicate effectively and be in control of their own communication. So that's usually for interpreters, because when they are, you know, someone is communicating through an interpreter, you're relying on someone to communicate, right? But the idea is that the interpreter is being as, you know, is being a conduit. So I'm just like translating, but I'm not trying to mediate. That's kind of like one of the tenets, right? There can be a balance. Sometimes I have to mediate and explain things culturally, okay? So, so the takeaway here, and I'll pass the video because it's too long. So everyone's the expert in their own culture, ask for clarification. So when we have like a interpreting situation, and as an interpreter, I notice there is like a miscultural, you know, like a miscommunication, instead of like me taking the role and saying, well, this is happening because, you know, and I'm gonna explain what is happening, I encourage the doctor or the judge or whatever to ask the person who is the expert on his own culture to ask what is going on. So everyone is like, the biggest experts on their own culture is, you know, it's the people. So ask them, like be curious and ask them. And when you notice like some communication, like ask, like, how do you understand, like maybe there is some communication, is that, for instance, like if you notice like a person is not looking in the eye, and you're perceiving that as rude or something like that, you can ask, like, are you having a, like, you know, is it okay if I look you in the eye? And like, are you comfortable with me looking? So you can ask and kind of like extract that information so that you can adapt your communication to that need. Cultural awareness. So that's probably like something that you're used to, like being aware of what's the concept, like the context, and what's the cultural implications of a culture. So let's see this little video.
A complicated surgery. I'm afraid I have bad news. To save your life, we need to perform a complicated surgery, but there's no guarantee that it will work.
Me temo que tengo las malas noticias. Para salvarle la vida, necesitamos practicar una operación complicada, pero no se puede garantizar que funcione.
Very sad. Okay. So that's happening in like in a hospital setting, and here the interpreter is not being aware that in that culture is not okay to give such bad news in front of the patient. In some cultures, you talk to the family, and the family is the one that conveys the message. Okay, so that would be wrong. So this would be the
Afraid
right
I
way
have
to
bad
do it.
news. To save your life, we need to perform a complicated surgery, but there's no guarantee that it will work.
Doctor, I have to point out that in the Mexican culture, serious news is first shared with the family. The family then decides how much of the serious news to tell the patient.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, so that can come as a shock for us, like, you know, because it's like, of course the patient has the right to know. That's your culture. Not always, like, you know, so you have to like be aware of these things and like embed them in your communication. That's like another example that happened to me when I arrived here in the States. When I went to the doctor, they were like, okay, so what's your pharmacy? And I was like, what do you mean, what's my pharmacy? Like, I don't know, like a pharmacy. And then they were, yeah, we're like, don't you have like any other pharmacy assigned? And I was like so confused because in Spain, you just get like the prescription and you go to any pharmacy. So the idea that the doctor would send like a prescription to a pharmacy was very weird for me. So the takeaway here is that, you know, be aware of your own culture and offer explanations before, you know, if you detect, like offer explanations before it results into miscommunication. So for instance, in the example of the pharmacy, if I detect, you know, when I'm like, what's your pharmacy? And I'm like, oh, in the States, usually like doctors send the prescriptions to a pharmacy. So that's why we need to know which pharmacy we have to send that to. That would have clarified for me what was going on, okay? So, culturings. So I'm getting here like in the realm of culture. Culturings are basically like the things that we see at the surface level when we are translating texts, and they are objects and features of the physical environment. So for instance, if I find like in a text IRS, so that's like a very US specific cultural entity. If I have to like convey that idea for like a Spaniard or a Chinese person, how do I convey that idea? Is there like an equivalent? Is there like an equivalent IRS in Spain or in China or wherever? That's like a way. Another way is explaining what, you know, IRS is that horrible place. You know, like, no, I'm just joking. I had a very bad experience with IRS once, but I'll tell you I'm from Valencia, so in Spain I'm from Valencia. So every time that, and again, like I'm coming back to this idea that culture is so identitarian. So every time that I see someone putting like a video of a paella and I see things like, I don't know, I've seen everything, but chorizo or I don't know, I kind of like, I get, I physically react because it's such a part of my identity. And like Valencian paella is like chicken and rabbit and vegetables, and that's it. So how do I explain this? Like, you know, this is like a culturing. This is such a thing related to my culture that that I have like different options when I'm translating. I can just like leave paella, you know, like just like what we call like a borrowing, and just like say the name and then we figure out the way that I would use like pork roll in a Spanish text. You know, New Jersey is very famous, like New Jersey es muy famoso por sus pork rolls. Okay, and then I might explain what it is, you know, but I will never, as a Spaniard, even if I say it's a sandwich with hamburger, they will never really understand until they come here and they have a pork roll, what a pork roll is, okay? So there is, of course, you know, in the culturings, we're gonna always lose a little bit of that. Yeah? And it can be, you know, related to culture. It can be so it can be related to to traditions, like the two kisses, names of people, places, attitudes, etc. For instance, like YouTube, that's another like funny one, because in the Spanish cultures, we translate the name. So we say udos, like literally YouTube. So sometimes it causes confusion with the name of the group, even if most of the names are not translated. Or, like the kisses, what I was talking about, 8 kisses in some cultures, 4, 3, usually in France, 3 kisses, and 2 or 1. That's something that and it's so embedded in me, like every time I meet someone from Latin America, I'm like, because like it's so, integrated that I go to the second kiss and then they're like, what are you doing? It's confusing. So that's part of it. So it's acculturating. And then the takeaway would be that some concepts are just not transferable. So we're ready to find ways to explain out what they mean, even if the most obvious to you. Okay, so things that you are like, yeah, purple, of course. Who doesn't know what a purple is? Well, many people don't know what it is. I actually found out like a couple of years ago, and I've been living here for ages. Okay, so related to that, cultural untranslatability. So it happens when there is no lexical or syntactical level, so that's related, like what we saw, like paella, there's actually not really an equivalent. And it happens when, even like in the situation, there's not like, the construct in our minds is just not equivalent. So if I, even like with words like bathroom, so what is a like bathroom, if someone from Japan thinks of bathroom, is gonna think of a different thing than if someone from Turkey or someone from the States. Like one thing that shocks us, like Spaniards a lot, and I think probably other cultures, is that public bathrooms have like this big space underneath. And we're like, why? It feels so not private for us, right? But that's like a standard. It's probably like, even the reason is like some legal requirements or something like that. So that's a reason. So that would be like a European style. Actually, I was looking for images, and when I was looking for this type of bathrooms, the right ones, it was like European style, bathroom style. And I was like, interesting, okay. Bread is another one. Like bread, like the construct of bread for a German and for an American, 2 different words. And the word is the same, bread, pan, Brot in German, okay, but like for a French, different words. So even if you speak the same language, so if someone is translating from their language and they say bathroom or bread, what you have in mind might be different from what they have in mind, okay? So even if there is like this communication in the same language, the construct in their minds might be different. Intertextuality is another one that happens, it's a reference in another text from another, for known to the source language audience. And it can be usually textual, we're not in Kansas anymore. That's a reference to the Wizard of Oz. If you haven't seen the movie, or if the movie is not known in your culture, you probably will lose the reference, okay? Because that reference is other movie. I don't know if you have seen Suits. It's full of intertextual references, like Harvey and the other guy, I don't remember his name. They're always like imitating other characters. They are always like referencing. And I always thought, like, poor translators, because many of them are just lost, or it's very difficult to find the equivalent. And it can be also, like, intertextuality can be also not only textual, when we are in Halloween and we are seeing these characters and we recognize them, it's because we have intertextual knowledge. So everybody recognizes, the right one. And then also, like, this guy doing the you immediately think of the Titanic movie, right? So even like gestures can be intertextual. And again, like the role of the translator is to recognize those. So it's about textuality and multimodality, and they reflect and inform new ways of interiorization. Okay, so it's not only that I recognize them, but it's almost like circular in the way that it reinforces that meaning, and that sometimes even like it becomes so normalized that it's part of the language, and we don't even realize that it actually came from another text or from another movie. So it becomes part of our language. Okay, so I'm finishing. I have like 1 minute, but I'll be like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So domestication and foreignization. So when we have like all these cultural issues, we can face it with like different strategies. So we can be domesticating. Domesticating is basically I'm going closer to the reader. So I'm going to adapt it to the reader, to who is receiving the message as much as possible, so that it's not foreign, so that it feels like if it was written in that language for that culture. Okay, so I'm adapting the message as much as possible to that culture. Foreignizing means that I'm gonna translate, yeah, but I'm gonna keep some of the elements, the paella. So just to put an example, so if I have the paella, a domesticating version would be, instead of paella, would be like a rice, like a dish, rice dish with meat and fish. That would be, so I'm getting closer to the audience, so I'm explaining. If I'm doing like the foreignizing, I would be, a paella, you will have a paella. You figure out what it is. So I'm throwing that foreignizing, like foreign element in the text, and then I let the reader to figure it out. And I have like different, and it's of course a continuum. In the same text, I can have like different strategies. So I can either have like, like a complete, import the term into the target language. For instance, like concepts like siesta that we use in Spanish. So that's like a foreignizing thing. So I'm bringing this concept from that culture into this culture instead of saying now. I could say now, but siesta has like other layers of meaning, right? So I use that to like transport the concept, and then I can go with different, different strategies to approach that concept. So balance, clarity, and respect for the culture. So it's a balance sometimes, and in the same text you can use both domesticating, so you can be closer to the reader or closer, and sometimes you can use that foreign term for that person, like IRS, and kind of like embed that as part of how you communicate. So final one, invisibility, visibility. So the common tenet is that translators and interpreters should be invisible. So the ideal is that when you see a text that is translated or you're interpreting, you should feel that the text was written originally in that language, that the text hasn't been translated. And that's probably our experience. If you have read any literature in translation, if you have read a book that was written in Chinese, in Arabic, and you have read it in English, unless you're a nerd like me, you're not thinking of how it was written in Arabic or in Chinese. You're just like enjoying the product in English, okay? So we're invisible. You're not thinking of the translator. You're just enjoying the book, okay? But there is a trend to also make the translator more visible, because at the end of the day, the translator is a person, is a human person, and makes decisions based on their system of beliefs and their positionality and their ideology, etc. Okay? So we as translators, as intercultural mediators, we have to recognize and reflect on our own ideologies and positionality and how that reflects in the way that we communicate. Okay, so what's my ideology and how that's reflecting in the way that I speak and that I communicate. Okay, so finishing, and I know I'm out of time. So reflection questions, and I don't have the answer, but I do have kind of. But after all this, is translation even possible? After all these struggles, and is intro communication even possible? What do you think?
Yes.
So it is possible, right? So with trade-offs, with risks, we are losing something sometimes, we are gaining something, okay? And we just have to have the strategies and the tools to make it, as smooth as possible. There's gonna be rocks, there's gonna be problems on the road, yeah. But, with these strategies, or I think these strategies can help to make it possible. It's possible, it's not perfect, but it's possible. So here, just a summary of the takeaways. I'm not gonna read them out because I'll share the presentation. And that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Rihi. I'm currently a second year Master's of Public Health student at Morgan School of Public Health. I've done 3 study abroad experiences in India, Tanzania, and St. Lucia in the Caribbean, so I'm super excited to talk about that.
Okay, everyone, this is Monica.
So I'm also a second year graduate student whose my concentration is global public health, and I've taken one study abroad program which is Caribbean Islands. I'm excited to share that with you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatna. I'm also a Rutgers School of Public Health master's student, and my concentration is in global health. I've done 2 study abroads. I studied in Thailand in undergrad at Rutgers, and then I'd also just studied in St. Lucia with Rini and Mom. Good to meet you.
Wow.
Ciao everyone, I'm Angela Ko. I am a senior at Rutgers University. I am graduating in 2 months. I'm majoring in marketing and minoring in psychology and dance, and I study abroad in Rome, Italy.
Hi everyone, my name's Bianca. I'm a junior in biomedical engineering, and I studied abroad just last fall in South Korea at Seoul National University. So I'm excited to talk about that. Great.
I'm curious, what drew you each to study abroad, and maybe through that experience, were any of the outcomes different than the expectations, or what drew you to the program?
Okay, I can go ahead. So what drew me to study abroad in the first place was kind of like a graduation gift to myself, because I actually came from obtaining my associate's degree before coming to Rutgers. So as a transfer student, I was also a little nervous about coming to Rutgers, and like study abroad kind of like not only brought me into Rutgers in kind of like a nice way, but it also gave me not an out. It enabled me to kind of expand in a way that I had truly never done before, because I had lived at like home my whole life. So being able to spend those 4 months just out and about, like in another country away from my family, it was a little bit daunting, but it was so worth it. So yeah.
I can go there. Can you hear me from here?
Yes. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so studying abroad has always been one of my dreams, biggest, wildest dreams I've had since I was a little girl. So that experience, I definitely made it happen, thank God. But I think what really my motivation was in terms of personal development and bettering myself, throwing myself into a different culture and experiencing life outside of my own and my community definitely was a challenge, but it's also a testament to how far I've grown in my life. I think my transition was a little bit easier compared to others because I am a very independent person, and growing up around the city, I know how to manage myself. So in that sense, it was definitely a dream, but also a dream that was attainable for me.
So mine is a little bit different. It was more so, as somebody who's in public health, I've always been interested in and also who loves traveling. I've always wanted to kind of branch out and just kind of understand how other countries work. So this specific program in Thailand was on just understanding how Thailand's healthcare system works, and just their universal healthcare coverage. So this opportunity was kind of given or presented to me through a professor. And so I kind of just, thought about it, and I was like, why not? This is, I'm in undergrad, I'm not gonna, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I was able to travel, and I really wanted to go somewhere that I'm not familiar with, so I can be comfortable in an make myself comfortable in an uncomfortable environment. And it truly impacted me in such a positive way, because now I'm doing my master's in global health. And if I hadn't went to Thailand with my class, I'd probably now be doing my master's right now. Yeah.
So being an international student, I feel like coming to US itself is like a study abroad program only. And on top of that, I've chosen another study abroad program where I'm doing my master's.
the reason why I choose that program is like, initially I love traveling just like Fatima, so I wanted to explore new places and all. And I'm happy that I chose this course because I got to know about their, not just about their culture, and even being a master student who's taking public health as my major, I came to know about their socioeconomic status, their cultural aspects, whatnot, everything. So that 1 week trip is like a good experience for me.
So I'm gonna go a little left wing here and say, so I like when I did my undergrad at Rutgers too. So when I like came into college, I sort of came in with the idea that I wanted to study abroad. I had a lot of like older friends and like cousins who both had and hadn't gotten the opportunity to study abroad. So it was something that I knew I wanted to take advantage of. And secondly, I was always a person who had like loved stories growing up. So when I travel, like I see it as like a storybook where like every country or every new place I get to see is sort of a new chapter and sort of like introduces me to like new characters, a new way of life, which is something that like I'm interested in, and like something that I want to take with me to my like both in my personal and professional life as well. And like what was previously said, I love traveling. Even growing up, I was fortunate enough to like be able to travel and with my family, and being able to do it sort of academic setting with like classmates and with faculty has been like an amazing privilege.
I think I'll know the answer to this, but by show of hands, for how many of you, this was your first time in the country that you chose to study abroad?
Yeah, I think probably mine.
Yeah. So maybe if you can talk a little bit what it was like there, and maybe was there anything about living there that surprised you that was a little bit different than your expectations?
So Thailand was, sometimes I like to say I had no words because how amazing it was. The culture, the traditions, it's very different. One of the things that really shocked me was that every day they have like a lucky color that they wear. So like Tuesdays they wear red, Wednesdays they'll wear green. Like it was very cool to see. It was just a very huge learning curve. And it really inspired me to, because, you know, I've also been very lucky enough to travel with my family growing up. And this study abroad actually really kind of set me in where there's different cultures, people practice different things different ways, and it made me more open to accepting and like, you know, learning more about these cultures and like doing what, you know, kind of like learning on how they do things. Like you know, they taught me how to like cook some of their traditional foods, and a lot of the languages that I didn't know that they spoke there. The Thai language, to be specific, it is a very complex language, and we were given a class, like a 1-day like crash course on like what to say, basic things, and we were able to communicate as best as we could. But just, you know, kind of seeing that, how the language and the culture and the tradition is so deep rooted and how hospitable they are, it kind of like really motivated me to like be open to learning more cultures and traditions with every new country that I go to. That I actually started learning a new language recently. I started learning Arabic. So yeah, I feel like it's opened me to a lot of new opportunities, and just be genuinely more accepting and open-minded to, you know, every new country that I go to. I always look into, you know, what their culture, what their traditions, you know, are before I go.
I guess I can move next. What surprised me most about living in Italy definitely was the culture. What I really like about Europe and what I feel like I align with is the perspective of working to live rather than living to work. I think that, yeah. After growing up in the tri-state area and being very, very involved in being a ambitious person, it has taken a toll on me. And I think I went at the right time where I really needed time to process and reflect my whole life up until now. So yeah, definitely in that sense, they have this thing called, I call it a siesta time because it's nap time, but like through 2 to 5, nothing is open generally. That's so imbuing in the sense of working to live, not living to work. They don't work during those times and they spend time with their family. They spend time with their friends. They take care of each other. Yeah, they just relax and kosi, like nothing crazy, just sit and chill, like everything will work out. So I think that was surprising at first, but I like to say I'm a very adaptable person, so I was able to adapt to that pretty easily after coming back for such a crazy life here. So that definitely was, in a sense, very eye-opening for me as well.
I think going off of like the adaptable perspective, I think that was like one of the things that sort of not surprised me, but like sort of just opened my eyes to it. Just like seeing how resilient, like especially under-resourced, like countries are, and like how they adapt to that, to sort of adapt to that. So like I'll like explain this with like an anecdote. So when I was in Tanzania, we were in the capital city, Dodoma. One of the things we did was we taught Stop the Bleed, which is basically just like teaching them like bleeding control techniques to the School of Nursing students. And while we taught them was like commercial tourniquets and like pressure dressings, which is what we're used to using in like the US and especially in places that have the resources to do that. They taught us like how to create our own like DIY tourniquets with like shawls, which is what a lot of the ladies wear there, and with like shawls and sticks and whatnot, and they were equally as functional. So just seeing how they adapt to like what's available to them and how they make it work was something that was really what it is.
So speaking to my experience, I think what surprised me the most about going to South Korea is how similar it was to like being home. So it was so easy for me to adapt, which was kind of scary to me because I was like, shouldn't I be like worried or something? And aside from the language barrier, which was probably the most scary thing about it, I think it was really lucky for me that I got to learn it for the first 3 months that I was there. So it actually really helped being able to be kind of immersed in the language every day. And even though the culture is like different, it was the same as here. So it was actually really nice, and it was kind of like a gradient as I went through the months that I was there. It kind of like felt like another home, especially with the friends that I've made and like the places that I visited and all the experiences that I was able to kind of give myself the opportunity to experience. I think it was so nice to kind of like go through that, not just by myself, but with other people who were also studying abroad, who are also like feeling the same way, especially towards the end where I was getting a little bit homesick. They were too. So like it was kind of nice being able to share a lot of the same experiences. And I think that especially with my program, I think I was lucky because technically I'm a senior, even though I'm junior in credits. So I was able to do a lot of the fun things, a lot more fun than most engineering majors would be able to do studying abroad. And I think I went at the right time, despite what other people would say about studying abroad in your last year of school. I knew that going in, but like it was still so amazing to experience, and it was definitely worth every minute. And it was definitely worth the fact that I have to push my graduation a year, but it doesn't matter because it's so worth it.
So studying in St. Lucia, Puravi, I got to taste 7 different local teas which are made over there. And even with the other cuisines, like they make chicken different, like it's very different if I have to compare with US as well as my country. So everything is different, like the cuisine, and we tasted Plask bread, which is made in, it is like a local place. There we get to taste Plask kasa. And we had experience with sulfur springs. So the mud bath thing, which is a complete new experience for everyone and the ones who visited. We didn't really face any difficulties with the language because most of them do speak English, although Creole is like their language. But then, just to be on the safer side, my professor she shared the video, like the local language, like the basic communication too. So I memorize things, but I don't really have to use them in the trip. That's good.
So what I'm hearing a lot that one of the predominant themes of the study abroad experience is language, and I think that's been a huge topic for us today and central to the idea of intercultural communication. Out of curiosity, how many of you speak another language? Do you think that made it easier in a way going into the study abroad experience? And do you speak the language of the country where you visited?
I got a story for this. So one of the study abroad experiences I went to was in India, and my family is from India, but I studied abroad in like West India in Kolkata, and my family is from East India, Gujarat. So different languages, but India has like the national language is Hindi. So I went and I was like, okay, like I know the language, like I can do Hindi. But when I got there, I was not so pleasantly surprised when I tried communicating with like the locals, even when we went shopping, like even local like stalls and whatnot. Like I would speak in Hindi, and like I would haggle in Hindi as well. And like I'd either be like met with like these questioning looks, or they'd respond in Bengali, which is a local language in Kolkata, and I would just be like, "What?" I'd ask to speak in Hindi, like while they would understand it, like they would only respond in Bengali. So that sort of created and like a communication barrier that I wasn't really expecting, and because I went in thinking like, hey, like this is my country, like I should know, but like it wasn't, that was not the case at all. So it was just a very like sort of alienating experience, and also like it gave that like it sort of really solidified the NRI, like the non-resident Indian experience for me. And given that it was like my first time, well, in India too, but that's a long story, but and also in that region. But it sort of brought forth a lot of conflicting feelings too about I'm in this world, like I grew up in this world, but like my culture is in this world, and like sort of where am I in terms of like where is cultures interact and intersect, and like I feel like I'm too American for like my Indian roots, but too Indian for like my American roots. So it was a very interesting experience in terms of like just that simple like cultural divide, even though I do speak one like the national language, and like my native tongue is completely different, but still like it was still creating that barrier.
Even I faced the same situation, but the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, most of them in the St. Lucia do speak English. But then when I visited the Castries market, which is like the local thing, so I bought a necklace, and then when I asked the vendor, he said it costs $10. I was like, no, this doesn't make it cost $10. I know the PC conversions and all, but still, in my mind, I was like, why would I pay $10 for this? And then he's like, no, that is EC dollars, like EC. You don't have to pay US dollars for it. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I am Pakistan. My parents are from Pakistan. So I speak Urdu, and my first language was English. But maybe it was a little bit of like a ego thing where I thought, okay, going to a new country, I know 2 languages, maybe I can learn a 3rd. When I got there, I realized that was not the case. And learning a new language, especially as somebody who just started learning a 3rd language, is definitely not easy. You have to take in a lot of things into account, not just the letters and reading and writing. It's the cultural aspect of it, and there's slang words, there's exceptions, there's so many different rules to every language. Like for English, there's 2, and 2, there's there, and there. How are you supposed to explain that to a non-English speaker? So going to Thailand, we did have guides because we were going into local villages and doing, like wound care and learning about how their universal healthcare system works and how they are in how they use holistic medicine versus Western medicine. So a lot of the terms that they were using were pretty universal when it comes to the healthcare system. But when we were, just talking amongst ourselves, whenever the guy was with us all the time, especially when the school day was over, we were by ourselves. So it was a very big learning curve in kind of just communicating with each other. It was a lot of charades and stuff, but somehow we were able to become super close. I'm still in contact with them. We still communicate through, it was through Google Translate. Google Translate isn't the most accurate, but it did get us by. But it also, with a new language, a new country, compassion and patience is the most important thing. And Thailand is a very, very hospitable country. And so they were always accommodating to us, especially because they were very excited to have worker students come and, see how they live. And I think one of the most important things was just patience. And it was mutual, when they were talking to me, I was trying my hardest trying to understand what they were saying, even though I don't really know that much Thai, and they were trying to understand me when I was trying to speak in English and doing my little charades. But I feel like, with just understanding, having an understanding between one another and that connection, you can become friends with anybody, no matter what the language barrier is. Yeah.
Yeah, so Rome, as you know, is a pretty international hotspot. So I found it really easy to find people that I interact with who speak English, as well as Italian. I went to an international American university in Rome, so that was even more centered around English-speaking culture and American culture. Also, Rome is notoriously known to never have an off-season for tourists, so not only did I hear a lot of English just because other tourists who came in found that as quote-unquote a universal language compared to Italian. So I found it kind of easy yet difficult to try to integrate myself into the culture and try to learn it as well, because I know a lot of people who are in my community as well as people outside were also speaking English, and I was trying to learn the language. But Italian is a beautiful language. Going into it, there's pockets of places where not everyone speaks English as well. So I found myself in those pockets and being able to converse with them and, always trying to learn it at the airport, wherever I went to. Actually, recently I went to the airport and I was speaking Italian with them. They're like, oh, are you from Italy? I was like, no, not. I'm just speaking Italian. But yeah, that was probably the most validating experience. And that was when I wasn't actually in Italy 2 years ago, a year ago. So it was very interesting in the sense that I do have Italian friends now. So I do try to keep up with them and try to exercise that muscle. I use Duolingo every day. I don't know how you guys feel about Duolingo in terms of learning a language and vocabulary, but that's something I do take with me. But in that sense, I think that I hope to go back and keep learning the language. And I think it's one thing to be learning language, but another to be living in the culture and having access to conversing with people every single day within that language as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree about having to use the language in daily life and then kind of learning it in an educational setting, because I learned I guess formally in an educational setting for the first 3 months, and it is really different from how people speak on a daily basis. So even though I was learning Korean, was very different because a lot of times they'll like shorten words or like put words together, and then it was almost like I didn't really learn anything at all. But I think it was very different from what I'm used to at home because my language, I'm Filipino, so my language is very phonetic and it still uses like English like lettering. But in Korea, I had to learn like all the alphabets, which I promise it's not that type. Like it'll take you an hour, I promise. But just being able to like read the characters is different than having to like memorize all the words, and like there are a lot of like different words that mean the same thing. Like you have to like use the different words for clothes when you're talking about different things, and it's a lot of nuances that living like daily life and being able to like talk to like your teacher or like your classmates, because nobody's talking about like, oh, like what's on that desk like in real life. Like they're asking like, oh, how much is this, like useful things like that. And even though I did learn it, it was still definitely a challenge, kind of adapting to like the cultural nuances of the language. But one thing that I do remember is that I actually went from, so I studied at Seoul National University in like the heart of Seoul, and I actually got the chance to travel to Busan, which is like a 2.5-hour train ride away, and I noticed how different the languages are. Even though they're still speaking Korean, there's just like the accent is like, even though it's so minor, they have different words that mean the same thing, and it was almost like I got exposed to another language while I was there, and I just thought it was so interesting, and it kind of made me appreciate like how like the smallest things and the smallest nuances are like different in the same language. And I think also another experience that I really appreciated while having studied abroad is the experience that I got being around other global students. So I got to hear all types of languages, especially through like my buddy program that I was a part of, and it kind of made me want to learn like the Filipino language more. So that's actually why I know a little bit more now of my native language, and I like that's how much study abroad like really affected me, and like I couldn't be more grateful.
And I wanted to mention to that end about like struggling with identity, and whenever you're learning a language, I think that makes you turn into yourself and question what you want out of a certain language or like your connection to it. Like personally, I am South Korean, and so hearing you talk about Seoul National University and how your experience in that place helped you navigate your own personal identity is really inspiring. But I think I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, so, and then coming to a place like Rutgers where it's so diverse and I surround myself with diversity, and especially as a second generation immigrant, it really makes you turn to yourself. Like when I went to Rome and when I went to Italy, I felt like I was back in a similar place where people didn't necessarily look like me, and maybe that's part of my fear of why learning the language was more difficult, because I knew like we were talking about like language bias and bias from before, that they would already think a certain way about me. But overall, I think that being in a predominantly white culture versus a different culture than like colonialism and everything, so I think that also takes into account learning a language and your connection to language as well.
Really appreciate you all sharing your stories. That anybody?